So we are in a garage that we would like to turn into a nice woodworking workshop. All we have is a hobby CNC table, a router table that we built last week, and a small pile of plywood. We are making most of the necessary tools ourselves, and today we will build a workbench. Last week we started our workshop with nothing but a CNC table and a dream of having a functional woodworking workshop. If you would like to follow along with this journey, hit that subscribe button. Now on to the video. The challenge for today is building spacious workbench using plywood sheets that aren't big enough for a traditional workbench. For now I've been using a temporary solution, just putting two sawhorses next to each other and a sheet of plywood on top. It has been my workstation for the past week. However, it's a terrible solution for the long term. So we have two options. We can purchase a workbench, however this would take quite a lot of money if we wanted a brand new one. Or we can build it ourselves. This way we can build something that will best serve our needs and save some money for tools and upcoming projects. I was considering building a crafting table we designed a while ago. It's a sturdy design, however we don't have the necessary material for it. So one evening I was designing a workbench option that we could make for this workshop. However, the next day I realized that the table that I came up with wasn't that different from the solution that we currently have. If we take it apart, you can easily identify two sawhorses and a tabletop. So this wasn't good enough, but then I thought to myself, maybe the sawhorses aren't such a bad idea. We are just looking at it from the wrong angle. This was looking promising. To make it sturdier, I added side panels to the table and a frame for the bottom shelf. The concept was ready, I just had to design the components. While designing the table, I had to consider the sizes of material we have in our workshop. And component by component, the workbench came together nicely. For the frame we decided to use 18mm plywood sheets, and for the shelves we used 9mm plywood. To maximize the functionality of the table, I added dog holes to two tabletop panels. Then I added some dog holes on the bottom shelves as well. I will show you why later. The design was ready for CNC operations. I wish the CNC cutting was as simple as loading the plywood on the table and removing the finished components. However, during the CNC operations some things went wrong. First, I had issue with the dust collection. When the CNC was cutting near the home position, the vacuum hose detached from the dust chute. Earlier, I had changed the hose attachment point at the ceiling. I had to move it closer to the back wall since I had a GoPro right above the table. So the camera was in the way of the hose attachment string during the CNC operations. Because of the new attachment point, the vacuum hose couldn't stretch enough. Therefore, a couple of times it got detached from the CNC. And then I almost hit a hold down screw. I used small plywood offcuts to hold down components like tabletops and shelves. But as it turns out, the retract height I had set up was only 5mm. This meant that the router bit was traveling between the cuts only 5mm above the material. Thankfully, the screw was sticking out less than 5mm. The third mistake that I made was running the contour cut in the wrong direction when cutting some components. As you know, conventional milling ensures the best quality of the cut and you get smooth plywood edges. Unfortunately, for some operations, I forgot that I needed to change the cut direction in my software, therefore doing the climb milling. The results were not as good as I wanted them to be. Anyway, after the CNC operations, I had to remove the support tabs. I used the good old chisel and hammer method. After it was done, I used our router table with the flush trim bit to remove whatever was left of the support tabs. Then, using the chamfer bit, I trimmed the component edges. While trimming, I had to be mindful which edges I wanted to chamfer and which should be left as they are. I didn't want to chamfer the joint edges. That would make the finished project less attractive. The only exception to this was the dovetail joints that we are using at the side of the table. A little chamfer will highlight it, and that will add a nice detail to the table. Since we had a lot of dog holes that needed their edge trimmed, I decided to use Makita router that we have on our CNC. It's quite simple to remove, it only takes loosening 3 or 4 screws and lowering the Z-axis. Once it was done, trimming the dog holes was quick. And then it was time for the most satisfying task, assembling. The first thing that we assembled was the frame for the bottom shelf. and after installing 4 wedges, we put it at the side for later. The second task was to assemble the table sides. Since we used the dovetail joints, this made me anxious. My biggest worry was how well the components would go together. For joints like these, even the slightest contour offset could end up in disappointment. But it turned out perfect. Just look at this. If this doesn't make you smile, I don't know what will. Alright, back to the assembling. Next, I added the shelf covers. Then it was time to install the shelf panels. The panels at the side add structure to the table and ensure that the dovetail joints doesn't come apart. After that, I had to install the bottom shelf frame we assembled earlier. Finally, it was time to add the other side of the table. When that was done, I asked my friend Andres to help me move the workbench to the floor and take apart the sawhorse table. We moved the workbench back a little, and I continued adding a bunch of wedges. Next, I had to flip the table upside down, so I could add small panels at the bottom of the legs. They are necessary for attaching the casters. When the casters were attached, I flipped the table back. Then all we had to do was install the bottom shelves and the tabletops. The table is done. However, there are some things that I haven't shown you yet. I made a couple of attachments for the dog holes, so we have a corner attachment and 3 other size stoppers. Also, I made a couple of cam clamps. They are excellent for securing your workpiece. But out of these attachments, boxes are my favorite. The dowels that we added to the base of the boxes make them stackable and safe for storing your tools or workpieces while you are working on a project or moving the table around the workshop. Another great detail about this workbench is that little edge that runs around the shelf will prevent your tools from sliding out of it while moving the table. My only regret is when cutting the attachments, I accidentally used the climb milling approach, and the result isn't as good as it could be. But I will remake the components at some point, most likely before applying the finish to the table. And one more thing about the finish. If you have any good recommendations on what type of finish we should apply for this table, please leave them in the comments. Anyway, that's it for today. Stay creative and I'll see you next time.